tonight. What a movie, right? I'm David Kim from Vanity Fair. We have a really excellent panel here to chat about this provocative, really exciting film. So let's start with the screenwriter, Mr. Zach Baylin. We have Jurnee Smollett here. Agent Husk himself, Jude Law. And our brilliant director, Justin Kurzel. It's one of those movies where I think it's good to give people a moment to process. We're going to chat. Justin, one way you described this movie that I've seen that I found really appropriate was dangerously relevant. I thought maybe we could start with that descriptor in terms of what drew you to making this film.
Well, it kind of wasn't. I read it, like Zach sent me the script, and it was just a fantastic kind of read, and kind of about how the film unfolds. The first sort of 10 or 15 pages was this sort of amazing heist film, and you go, what are they doing with the money? And then suddenly it was this sort of, domestic terrorist group funding this sort of militia, and then suddenly the Turner Diaries turned up, and it was, that first read was this sort of unpeeling of, wow, is this a real story? And being Australian, I had no idea about the sort of the events and the history of it. And then there was something about it that I thought, no, this has a muscularity about it, and it has a kind of familiarity about it in terms of films that I really love from William Friedkin and Sidney Lumet, those kind of old school kind of classic Americana films. And as we started working on it, I don't know, it became more relevant. Suddenly sort of seeing January the 6th, and there were these sort of props that were being sort of placed outside the Capitol building, these sort of ropes that obviously were having a conversation with the Day of the Rope chapter in Turner Diaries. And so it did, as we were developing the script and then shooting and editing and then obviously releasing the film, sort of had a shallow point to today.
I'm curious what your first conversations were with Zach before I bring you in, just in terms of what the script was and how you wanted to make it. I mean, it really does feel like films of that era. It's very much in conversation with them. What was director and screenwriter? What was the initial conversation like?
I mean, it was the genre of a thriller. Like, I think that's what I got really excited about. It wasn't this overly political film in terms of how it played out. It just had this sort of classicism to it that, and firmly kind of knew what it was in terms of this sort of cat and mouse story that, I thought was very clever in terms of sort of speaking to, obviously a very character-driven film and issues and ideas and conversations that were sort of now, but it was sort of hidden amongst this fantastic kind of genre thriller. So I thought that was really clever and really brilliant from Zach.
So Zach, when did you first read the book, which you wrote the script from, and how did the script evolve from there?
I sort of read the book after I had gotten interested in the story. So I had gone down sort of a bit of a research path where I was looking into domestic terrorism and far-right groups, militia groups, and that sort of dovetailed into a bit of a research jog into Timothy McVeigh and the Oklahoma City bombing, which was highly influenced by the Turner Diaries and by Bob Matthews. So once I had sort of found that, a producer, Brian Haas, and I went and found the book a bit in an effort to find like a kind of totemic So, that was a little bit of a different process, like into it, and then, so now I'm thinking in the second half of your question, but, yeah, I mean, it was then a very kind of long, years-long process of trying to figure out where how to contain what was in that book into a film. And it was, what Justin was saying, it was very clear earlier on to me that maybe the bones of it was this sort of classic, 70s, 80s sort of toned crime thriller. And then the process of developing that into who those characters were was incredibly collaborative with Jurnee and Jude and with Nick and Ty. And so, like the bones of what the huge elements of the story were kind of always there, but it was very rarely as a writer you get the chance to actually like develop the nuance of the character with the actors and with the director, and so it was very fortunate to get to do that with all of them.
Jude, I believe you described coming to know Justin as someone who's very like-minded in terms of your approach to art and filmmaking. What about those initial conversations, how do you come to that realization?
Just over time. Initially, it's like it's a very individual relationship you have with the director, and and I'm sure with a director, with an actor, you don't necessarily always know how you do it, right? But so you kind of tiptoe around each other, and what was clear to me was how he was immediately going to interpret and unpack the material, and the discussions, as Zach said, around areas that we could start delving and mining. But it was his hands-on approach to the actual process that he knew I was going through, which a lot of directors don't often get involved in, they're not interested in, or they don't even know what you're doing as an actor. And so I was off for a couple of months prior, writing up backstory and trying to understand who this guy was so I could better sort of interpret him and get inside his skin. And then out of nowhere, Justin would just send ideas and suggestions, and it came in this sort of manifesto, which was a real, just think about this. What about this? Is this something you want to think about? Is this helpful? Call me and leave a message as him, as the character, thinking about this part. And it just felt, and what I realised with hindsight was that by the time we got on set together, he was as invested in the character as I was, kind of knew him like I knew him, and so could kind of paint with him like I hope to as an actor. So it would be, show me that side, or draw on this aspect, and it became very, very nuanced and very caring, and that's rare. That's really rare. And then of course he's done it with everyone, so it's not like he's painting with all of us. But it's rare because sometimes you are expected to turn, and by the way, this is fine, but you turn up, you do your work, you turn up, and it's like, not as brutal as this, but hit your mark, and hit the light, and cut. And it felt much more organic, and going back to what Zach said, the process of fleshing these characters out, and I'd love Jurnee to talk about this, because what she brought to Carney was a whole different idea, mindset, perspective than was on the page. But to be able to work with a writer and then have a director steer you like that is very unique.
Jurnee, I'll throw to you.
Sorry, how did you?
But I'm curious exactly what you said. What was that process like from going from page to creating your own character out of Carney?
It was such a joy to create and collaborate with this group that I'm sitting amongst right now. When Zach first wrote the script, the Carney character was written as a man. And so when I first met with Justin, we were really in the beginning stages of, well, what does it now feel like to have it be a woman embody this character? And it's just such a beautiful collaborative process. Justin, working with him is really a dream, as Jude was saying. It's rare to have a director that really wants to really get underneath the skin and understand the DNA of the character. And so, we talked a lot about one, the fact that as a woman during that time, you know, it was a very new thing for women to even be able to hold the position of a special agent in the Bureau. And it wasn't until 1976 that a black woman even was admitted into the Bureau as a special agent. And so Carney has to be the best, because when you are one of the only ones, and you are an other, there's no tolerance for you to fuck up, right? There's no tolerance for you to be okay, you know, like she's brilliant, she's succeeding, and she's gotten to where she's gotten because she is great at what she does, which is why sometimes in the scene, you know, when Terry goes rogue and he's following his instincts, you know, she doesn't really have the patience for that because she can't do that. You know, she has to play by the rules. She has to play by the book. And what I love so much is working with Jude. You know, he doesn't have any sort of ego. You know, I'm gonna be real. Like you never know when you work with like such dashing movie stars. You know, you never know what you're gonna get. You know, you could get the guy who's got a 10-person posse, you know, and his own hair and makeup trailer. I've had those. Or you get someone like Jude who, you know, from day one of me joining the team, he's calling me being like, okay, these are the research materials I've been using, let me know what you find, and we're exchanging documentaries that we've watched, and no ego whatsoever. It was always about the work and finding the truth. So yeah, it was such a beautiful and organic process being a part of this team.
Right, you conducted a lot of interviews, right, in informing this character as well.
Yeah, I interviewed a lot of former special agents, a lot of women of all kinds, but particularly women of color, to be able to ask them, you know, what was it like to serve in the Bureau during that time? And again, I tried to bring that level of like loneliness a bit to Carney, because that is some of the themes I picked up on from the interviews was, you know, it can be a little lonely and also the job is their life. You know, that's one of the things we discussed that I know I can relate to, the job becoming the thing that you wonder, is it worth the sacrifice? You know, is when you give your mind, body, and spirit to something you love, is it worth it? Will it be worth it? You hope it will be worth it.
Jude, the characterization of Husk is, for me, it was very delicious to watch. There's a kind of Hackman-esque thing going on here, I think. But this is a character who's very tired, very worn. I'm just wondering what the physical work even looked like and getting into that headspace, and then especially getting into this mode where you are working through these heist sequences, and it seemed very demanding both emotionally and physically.
We really only talked. Is that working? I'm theatre trained, so I can probably project to the back of this auditorium. No, I'll take one. Yeah, I kicked into my theatre training. Honestly, the detail really went into, once we thought about we wanted this guy to feel like you could taste the cost of his career, and that cost is in his physicality, it's in his spirit, it's in his energy. And so the greater part of our attention really was just on understanding that. So we talked about the marriage that may have been, we talked about the career and what that takes, and you know, all of that you need to unpack, and you go and read up on agents who went undercover for years and what that's like. And obviously, again, he's very much a man of that time. So you know, the smoking and the drinking to sort of self medicate and just sort of recover and survive that kind of intensity. And then what happens to your body if you hit 50 and you've been smoking 60 a day and drinking scotch the way he probably did to put himself to sleep? You know what happens? And so, I don't need to describe it, you saw it. So those little details came up, and the more we talked about it, the more it became clear to me that, you know, that was the weight. It's the weight of responsibility. And you know, when you start getting into the details, it just starts to affect you. But if I'm really honest, I had an issue for a while, and you can put on the right boots, you can wear the belt and the gun, and all of that does have an effect on the physicality, to answer your question specifically. But I felt right up till about a week before like I was still sort of playing this guy and I wasn't feeling him, and I went home and at the time my two youngest children were both under 3 and I wasn't sleeping very well. I was very tired, and also I was concerned. I wanted to get this part right, and I got a cold and I went in on the Monday and we sat down and I was haggard and sniffing, and Justin just went, "This is it."
Perfect.
Perfect. Now, obviously, you can't maintain that for a shoot. You can, you can't go, okay, no sleep, and I'll keep this. What do I do to keep it? But once you sort of feel it, you know what you have to step into. You know, a skin. It's a kind of skin that you can kind of recreate. And once we had that, it felt like we forever had him, didn't we? And to be more specific about your question, therefore, then when you put him. We also knew we had in us, we had a man who knew how to turn it on. So when the time was right and he had to switch, he's the guy that runs into trouble, not away from it. And we talked a lot about temperature. I remember occasionally you'd always say hotter, like this is when he's got to go hot, and this is when he boils over. And so we were careful about also modulating that. He can sit still for a long time and absorb, but when he goes, he goes. So. Yeah.
It makes for a fascinating contrast with Matthews as well. Zach, I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit, just in the construction of the script, because he's this very charismatic, cult leader-esque kind of character, and obviously for bad, but it does contrast intriguingly with a guy who has this more noble soul, but is grinding, and you can feel it.
Yeah, but I think we were all pretty compelled to that contrast, and some of that is just factual, that all of the poisonousness of Bob's ideology. He was this very healthy living outdoorsman who at least purported to be living this very wholesome life, and so there were real FBI agents who worked this case who were certainly huge jumping off points for the story and for the character, but actually the guy who was probably closest aligned with Husk, who was an agent who had come to Coeur d'Alene and got involved in the case very similarly, and had a really storied career, but had seemingly come out of it a little bit unscathed, maybe, and that dramatically didn't feel like the best use of that character to kind of to contrast with Bob Matthews, and I think that ultimately what Justin and Jude and I talked a lot about was that at the heart of it, I think there's a big part of the film is about community and about family and about the sort of idea of a future that both of these characters are trying to build for whatever their idea of their family and their idea of America is, and that to see Bob, who is living what seems to be a healthy life, but really poisoning the people around him, and Husk, who has given everything and has sort of lost almost the ability to have an inheritance that he's giving to people, felt dramatically very interesting.
Justin, you kept Jude and Nicholas apart until their first filmed scene, is that right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about why that was important to you?
I don't know, it just organically kind of happened. We just sort of thought, like we were doing, you had two very, very different stories going on, so the rehearsals were different, and they wouldn't see each other, and I think Jude one day said, I haven't seen Nick, and then suddenly that went a day, a week, and then suddenly the crew were all in on it with keeping them apart, which was really funny, and it was quite great. It sounds kind of silly, but it's actually sometimes those things are you feel, and it creates a kind of thing. And so the last scene I think you guys had together was when you saw each other after the hunt, and they actually kind of visibly. But up until then, there were these sort of there were these scenes where they were chasing each other and they had to come in together to kind of have a look at the guns and do a sort of safety check and stuff. And they were kind of wonderful. They wouldn't look at each other in the eye and they kind of nod, and it was kind of wonderful. It was great. Like, because they were sort of committed, and it changes the crew. The crew goes, oh wow, there's something going on here. And it creates a kind of mystery and a bit of a narrative and a story. And it was quite wonderful on the last day when they kind of did this fantastic scene. You could feel it. There was a sort of tension and something foreign between them, and they built something that they owned. Like, I didn't own it, and Zach didn't own it. No one owned it but Jude and Nick, because they'd invested in that separation. And then we sort of cut, and they dropped the accents, and it was how the kids, and it was kind of, you kind of go, wow, that's worth it. There's, and it's a very, very, very simple thing to do. That just seems sort of right, but that organically kind of just sort of happened.
Jude, how did you experience that?
Well, much like Justin described, it didn't feel forced. It didn't feel even like a method thing. It was just what happened. And you are. I think I talked a bit about it, or I hinted at this before. It was an unusual process. You cling onto anything that gives it plausibility and authenticity and some kind of grounding, and you're looking for that all the time, right? You're looking for something that just. It is about truth, but it's just about feeling, making something interesting ring the right note. And also, the elephant in the room, we all knew going in that there were elements to this that were, very important, very delicate subject matter. You couldn't go in and goof about, right? You always, as a team, have fun making film, even if the subject matter's hard, but there was a respect, and it just felt wrong once this distance had started, that we'd be hanging out having lunch and then go do the scenes. It felt like it just felt reverent and it felt right.
To close, Justin, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about just getting this movie made 10, 20 years ago. This feels like a great studio movie. You had to make it independently. These are not easy movies to get made anymore. What kinds of challenges did you run into, and why was it important for you to give it that kind of scope that is reminiscent of those films from that era?
It was really hard to make. That's a shit of a thing at the moment. Is that these sort of films that, you're right, were sort of 10, 15 years ago were studio films. Harder and harder to make, and this is, it's an independent film, and it was done, very, very fast and in a very kind of precision way to be able to kind of do it in the resources that we had. So that shocks me. The kind of film that I kind of grew up on which was a blockbuster, are suddenly kind of independent. So I hope that changes. But they are harder to make.
Thank you all for making this excellent film.